example of a quantitative metric, which when you start talking about conversations and dialogue and input may seem a little more challenging to collect, but there's definitely lots of opportunity for those type of measures and metrics. We've also pulled in Don Joseph. He was very instrumental in developing a lot of metrics for the I-team as well as some other projects throughout the city of Minneapolis. And he is now going to be looking at how we do measurements, both quantitative and qualitative. So him and I, along with CPED, and ensuring that we are in line with what they're hoping to achieve, what their outcomes, what they want for their outcomes. So we can have an established system of reporting back both the quantitative and the qualitative, as well as it's a great opportunity to identify gaps. If there's some audience we're not reaching, we can then start looking at different strategies.
Thanks, Christina.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, we'll move forward with the rest of the presentation as well. So as Christina mentioned, she did mention quite a few of the engagement methods that we have already used and others that will be coming in the future. Here's a sample. We will be having large events, at least in each phase. And when we do these events, we have made a commitment to stand behind our goals and make them as inclusive as possible. We have a lot of in-person interactions where staff is spending the bulk of our time. We are, of course, using technology. We have a great website. We're going to be introducing augmented reality. We have a method called Tweet with a Planner that we're going to be doing on June 29th. And we have heard very clearly and wholeheartedly agree about introducing creative tools into all of our engagement methods as much as we possibly can. And Tina mentioned that as a qualitative metric. How can we use stories to garner feedback rather than just saying, here's a comment card, please fill it out. Using artists to help us get feedback is another major tool that we will be using. And in that vein, we have a 1-minute video. It's very quick that we did from Juneteenth this weekend that shows a little bit about what we've been doing on the ground.
What I think would improve the community would be affordable housing.
So my 6-word story for Minneapolis is everyone has to get there together, meaning that we have to have equity, not just racial equity, but equity for people of all genders and sexualities. I think it's important for the future.
We need like some type of peace treaty, for young adults from the age of 13 to 21, so they can stop killing each other on the north side of Minneapolis.
Okay, so I hope that our community in the future is more safe, more happy, and we are all working as a community together for growth.
Commit to action, hiring, and community leadership.
What I think is so helpful with CPED is if we open up opportunities with these vacant houses, do something equitable with families or low income earning people. I think that would be awesome. You heard it from me, Queen. One family, one community. Love you.
A city that works for everyone.
So we started introducing the video over the weekend. As you saw, we were asking people what their 6-word stories are for the city of Minneapolis, for the future of Minneapolis. And it's based on Hemingway's 6-word story contest. And people really, I feel like we got a lot more feedback because we were using something a little bit more creative that we actually started in our Creative City Making pilot a number of years ago. So this is just one of the ways that we're going to continue. And of course, it's another documentation tool that we can put online for people, particularly for people who don't want to read summaries. And so So that's just an example of how we're doing engagement right now. There are so many opportunities to work with partner organizations to leverage the work that they are doing, and know that we are starting to create criteria for these related initiatives. So that is under development and will be coming back to you. But some really basic opportunities we can use to connect with partner organizations within the community who want to organize their groups around a lot of discussions related to the comprehensive plan. So obviously, we can advertise the use of Meeting in a Box. This is something that we created for other people to be hosting their own events. So we as a city don't have to be everywhere where the conversation's happening. We know we can't. But that is a tool for them to be part of the discussion and get that feedback back to us and have it enveloped in the rest of the feedback. We can promote public events on the city's website. We can interact, we can show them how to interact with technology. If we're asking large engagement questions on the website, maybe that's a way to kind of facilitate a bit of a discussion for them. We can provide Minneapolis 2040 material for their meetings, informational material, and we can obviously incorporate all that feedback into our feedback process. Some examples of this are obviously Pangea World Theater's Lake Street Arts project that's going to be coming up, and next iterations of creative city making, particularly the Cedarside asset mapping phase 2. So I'm going to invite Paul Mogish up here to talk specifically about the timeline for engagement and some major milestones.
Thanks, Beth. Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Paul Mogish. I'm on the long-range planning staff and working on this plan update. Stepping back from the engagement topic for just a moment to look at the broad timeline for the entire Minneapolis 2040 comprehensive plan update process. As has been mentioned a few times, we're looking at this over the course between now and the end of 2018 as a 5-phase process. We've wrapped up launch. That is complete. We launched the process at the Community Connections Conference at the Convention Center this spring. The phase that we're in now, phase 2, is called Big Questions. This is when staff is working on starting to frame up what are we really doing here, what's this plan all about, what are we doing with those 15 topics that Beth showed you. And the end result of that is going to be a list of questions that frame up the process that we'll engage the public on. Then comes a lot of hard work in phase 3, the policy framework. This will be happening throughout 2017, most of 2017. And this is when staff begins developing some early draft policies, brings it out to the public to get feedback and interaction on that, brings it back to staff to further develop it, and back and forth. It's an iterative process that you can see in the arrows in this graphic between the policy development and the civic engagement process. Once that process is complete, this is when in phase 4, what we're calling policy document, staff will hunker down and bring this all together into a draft document, a cohesive, comprehensive plan document, not unlike what we have today in terms of format to put out there for review and to eventually submit to the Met Council. I do want to say that while we are tasked with developing this kind of bureaucratic PDF document, we do intend to have a second version that's the same content, but it's much more interactive and is much easier to navigate online or on a mobile device. And then finally, throughout 2018 is phase 5, the formal review phase, and I'll talk in a little bit more detail about what that means and what all of this means in terms of engagement. Before I get into some of those specifics on the dates on the timeline, going back to the list of or the partial list of methods that Beth was presenting a moment ago. The plan is that, our intent is that in 4 or 5 places or 4 or 5 months spread throughout the process, we'll devote 1 month in that phase to really focused engagement. And for each of those months of engagement focus, we'll do this kind of same pattern of methods with the same content that we're engaging folks on across all those methods. So during that month, there will be a community workshop, a large public meeting that Beth was talking about. We'll employ the community dialogues that Tina was talking about, which is a really, really great tool. We'll update the meeting in a box with the content that's being used at all of these other venues. And of course, people will always have the chance to engage with the same content online that people have the opportunity to engage on in these in-person venues. And as the process progresses, there will be other methods from that list that we'll employ that are specific to that particular phase. So you can see across the top, it's a little small, but across the top, the months that at this point we envision those engagement focus months to be are highlighted in red. Going forward, the first one will be this fall, probably October, when we hold the first major public meeting and do all those other engagement methods that we listed before. And it's called Big Questions. It's the culmination of this phase that we're in now, where those questions that staff are developing will bring forward. And we'll ask the city, we'll ask the people of Minneapolis to start thinking about the future of the city through the lens of their everyday experiences. You heard some of it in the video. We'll keep doing that and bring some focus to the conversation with some specific questions. And we'll do all this in plain language. We'll focus on topics such as housing, streets, jobs, and likely others. Then we'll come back in probably about March, sometime in the early spring, partway through the policy framework phase. We'll report back on what we heard in October. We'll ask folks, did we get this right? Did we hear you right? And we'll get a first look at draft policies on major policy issues, of course, with opportunities for discussion and feedback. Now, what's a major policy issue? Well, that will start to emerge through as we begin the conversation in October with those big questions. I will say though that one major policy issue that we know will be out there will be how do we accommodate and shape the growth that's coming for our city. So at this meeting and series of methods in March, we'll get a first look at some alternative scenarios for shaping that growth in population, housing, and jobs. Then around June, early in the summer, we'll come back again. The policy, generally speaking, we'll be doing one major engagement push for each phase. Phase 3 is going to be an exception because it's just so long and so much will be happening. We plan to do 2, so we'll come back in June or thereabouts, present refined draft policies based on the feedback and interactions we had during the March engagement. And by then we expect that we'll be able to present a recommended scenario from that series of alternatives for shaping growth in population, housing, and jobs. Once we've come to consensus on those major issues, as I said before, we'll hunker down and start drafting a plan. And that will take some time. So we will plan to come back at the beginning of 2018, probably roughly January, present that complete draft plan, ask for feedback on how it all fits together, and ask for feedback on how it addresses the 6 comprehensive plan values adopted by the council. And this will also be a good time to begin identifying implementation priorities. This will not be we don't expect that this is a plan that will just sit on the shelf. We need to decide collectively as a city what we're going to do, what action steps we're going to take to fulfill the plan policies. And then throughout 2018, this is when the formal review process happens. There will be a formal public hearing prior to adoption by the City Planning Commission and the City Council. Some of the other things that happen during this time are we need to circulate the plan among our neighboring communities, the cities that border the city of Minneapolis, and they actually have 6 months to review the plan, which is one of the reasons we need to set aside basically an entire year for this formal review process. And outreach during this time period will focus on making people aware of the formal opportunity to review and comment, and we'll be highlighting how the public input to date is reflected in the final document. I should note too that after each one of these major engagement pushes focused on 1 month, we plan to come back to the City Planning Commission, committee as a whole, and this committee for a recap of what happened during that phase, what we heard, and what's coming next in the next phase. So I will leave it at that, and that concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mogish. I want to thank staff. We had delayed this several times, and I've really been pushing staff, I think, farther than maybe initially wanting to go on getting to this level of specificity with the engagement timeline, and that's taken a lot of work here in the last month or so, and I just really appreciate staff's flexibility in getting to these details so that council members and our stakeholders and community members can see how these different phases of the plan, the decision points, are going to overlap with the different engagement methods. Just a note for my colleagues, staff is also working with communications. So staff from CPED and NCR and communications are working to put this into a format that could be shared with stakeholders. So any council member can send this to the folks in their wards or stakeholders that they have relationships with to just even get feedback from our stakeholders on how we intend to engage around the comp plan and our overall timeline. And then my intention is that staff would present back later this summer, and that we would, as we did with the original timeline, the overall timeline and some of those guiding principles that we adopted in April, that we would adopt a timeline and engagement plan for the comprehensive plan later this summer. So I'd like to see if any of my colleagues have questions for staff. Councilmember Kano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So two kind of simple questions, and then I have a sort of a bigger one. I couldn't find the presentation materials online. Will they be posted later on the sort of agenda?
Councilmember, good question. We actually just sent it to Diana during the meeting, so you will see it on the website.
Wonderful. And then I had a question via Twitter about how does this plan relate or connect to our previous plan? Is there a conversation between the two plans, or it's just a literal refresh where we just use the old one? And
sure, I can answer that question unless Tricia, do you want me to? Chair Bender, Councilmember Kano. So your question is about the last comprehensive plan versus this one. Mm-hmm. So the last time we did the comprehensive plan update, that was a real update. There were 2 to 3 topics that weren't covered well in the 2000 plan. And so that was how we looked at that one. We're looking at it somewhat similarly this time, but doing a larger process related to it, particularly when it comes to engagement. And so we have a variety of technical research teams that are based on those policy topics I showed earlier in the presentation. And one of their first tasks is to actually evaluate the existing comprehensive plan for what is still working, what isn't working, what is missing, what are some topics that are coming up that we hear bubbling up, and then so they have done that really basic research, but then we are tying them into the engagement process. And so in this big questions phase, they will be providing us questions that we will actually be bringing out to the community. And so there will be this kind of back and forth between the engagement process and the research teams related to their actual topics. But then we are also inviting research team members to come directly into the engagement process. For example, at Juneteenth, we had the Health Commissioner, Gretchen Musicant, actually doing engagement with us. And so there they can hear comments directly rather than, reading a meeting summary, which is different. So we are taking the old content, evaluating that, and seeing what needs to be changed for this new one.
Is that, and I'm asking these questions because this is my first time going through a comp plan process. So is that pretty typical that we just take the old document and then we just evaluate, refresh, and move forward with it? It's not like you come up with a whole new plan from scratch.
Chair Bender, Councilmember Kano, yes. And the reason for that is because it's meant to be a 20-year vision, but the Met Council requires us to update it every 10 years. And so when we're doing the comprehensive plan, we are looking to 2040. When we did the last one, we were looking to 2030, but we're not there yet. And so we expect that a lot of these topics are going to be more of those far-reaching visionary topics and then set the stage for us to make decisions along the way. And so that's why we do look back at the previous one, because we are still in the frame under which the Met Council had us do that plan. And so, but it is very important for us to take a look and see what topics are relevant now that weren't 10 years ago. did we accomplish some things that we really don't need to have anymore in the plan? So that's why you do start with what you have and then figure out where you need to go from there.
And then there was a slide, now I'm shifting gears a little bit. There was a slide in the section that Paul Mogush was presenting on regarding, I believe, workshops and community dialogues. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
And so as I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about, of course, ensuring that multilingual communities, immigrant communities, renters, low-income folks, indigenous folks can really weigh in and participate in this process in a meaningful manner. For a lot of them and a lot of folks in my community, including myself, this is the first time that we're being asked to weigh in on a process like this, which I think is pretty high stakes. And so that's why I'm engaging and participating a lot in this process, even though I'm not on the steering committee. And so when I look at the community workshops and I look at the community dialogues, I wonder, what are we as a city or the staff planning to do to help prepare people to have those conversations, because coming in sort of once and saying, hi, everybody, we're here to talk about the comp plan, to me is not, it's not giving the topic due diligence, because a lot of folks, this might be the first time that they're being asked about how to weigh in on this specific process and think about the connections between transportation and housing and some of the other issues that were identified earlier. So my big concern is kind of parachuting in and dropping this information on people and expecting the feedback to be something that the comp plan can actually bring into the fold. I've been tweeting with a few people about it just over the last 2 days, and even putting it out there with the links. I'm getting feedback such as, can we do critical pedagogy in the schools? And it's like, well, I'm not sure the comp plan can say anything about what happens in the schools, but maybe they can. I don't know. So I'm just trying to figure out how we can really help our community focus and prepare to participate in this discussion in a way that empowers their true voice to come out.
Chair Bender, Councilmember Cano, there's a lot of answers within your questions, and so I'm going to try to be very succinct. So within this 3-year process, a lot of people have actually said, why are you even engaging the community yet? There's not a lot for them to react to. Part of what we're trying to do is inform people about what is going on, raising awareness, which is one of the best ways that we can use our time at the street festivals. We know we are not having deep dive discussions in a 2-minute conversation with someone, but maybe we are helping to give them the tools to understand a little bit about what's going on and know where to go. And also within this 3-year process, we're doing a lot of informing at the beginning part. And that is really starting to build the dialogue and knowledge about what is happening. So by the time we get to these really meaty discussions in 2017, we have really started to build that capacity for people to know the insides of a very bureaucratic process. Another thing that we've been doing is trying not to go out and say, we are doing a comprehensive plan. It deals with these topics. So for the first phase of community dialogues that we did in March, we didn't even really say we are here talking about a comprehensive plan. The 2 questions we really talked about in these community dialogues were, how do you engage your own communities? And that was a way for us to start to understand community norms and culture norms related to engagement, what methods work. And we also said, what issues are you working on now? And a lot of the issues that we heard about are issues that are very relevant to the comprehensive planning process. So when we have community dialogues in October, we hope to go back to the same groups and broaden the number of people in those community dialogues. So we can say, hey, remember we were here last time, we asked you these questions, you gave us this feedback, this is how it informed the process over the summer. This is what we're here to talk about today, these big questions, these topics that are coming up. We will see you in March, and then we'll talk about how your feedback today influenced decisions coming up. And so that's how we start to build relationships and build capacity within communities who might not have been involved in this process before. We are there, they see us, they know that they've been heard, and so these get to a lot of our goals. And then, of course, with the community workshops, I mentioned, have given ourselves a goal of really trying to make these be as inclusive as possible. So a lot of what we'll do prior to these events is do communication in non-traditional media, like we did for the Community Connections Conference. We went to KMOJ. We talked about kind of what we're going to be talking about and why it relates to people's daily lives. We went to La Raza Radio. We did the radio show that Christina was talking about. We notified every single person who owns a business, has a business license, that's 10,000 people in the city, about community connections. And so we're trying to promote in non-traditional ways. We're trying to design these events to be as inclusive as possible so people can bring their kids, and that there's refreshments there, and that it's not just a presentation for an hour and a half where people have to listen, that people can engage in stations at topics that they care about, and they can leave the others behind. And so that's how we are starting to think about this, but we love feedback. We would love ideas.
So thank you. I appreciate hearing about the outreach with multilingual communications and getting that consistent message out there. I do want to note that on the partnerships, or there was like a few bullet points about how to tap into community-led events. The work with Pangea is pretty official. It's actually a City of Minneapolis partnership with Pangea, funded by the National Endowment of the Arts for the comp plan specifically. So finding ways to really elevate that and fit that into this larger process as sort of like a pilot program or a special partnership, I think is going to be important for the long term. And then I just want to thank Chair Stevenson and, of course, you and Paul and your team for working so hard on this. I know that we've had a lot of meetings, that we've really dug deep into these conversations, and I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but I know that we're sort of all trying to move it in the same direction.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
And I will mention, Chair Bender, that I hadn't mentioned yet that we do have this engagement team that we're working with internally, and a lot of the members are here, and they've been spending months developing the ideas, and they're experts in engagement, but we all know we can learn more and do better. So that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. I will then go ahead and move to receive and file this presentation. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. And just would also just note, if any council members have more questions or feedback, that staff is always available. Mr. Mogish or Ms.
Absolutely.
Elliott.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, we are adjourned.